Hello, I'll just say a few words before Armando introduces our speaker today and share my excitement about today. We had our first career fair after too many years. I don't know anyone remembers when the last one was, but I started in 2008 and it's my first time. And I think it's a good life-changing event for us, starting doing this annually. Hopefully it was our first time. And I appreciate all the firms attending. We had 16 firms attending and more than 100 students. So I think it was a good turnout for our first time. So I really appreciate all of you. And I think Dan Rockhill is the perfect person to end this day. So Armando will introduce him. But thank you, Dan, for coming, joining us today in our first, hopefully, annual career fair. Thank you so much.
So, thank you all for coming this evening. I'd like to introduce Dan Rockhill, who is an ACSA Distinguished Professor of Architecture at the University of Kansas, the Executive Director of Studio 804, which is a non-for-profit corporation committed to the continued research and development of sustainable, affordable, and initiative building solutions. Dan Rockhill and his students have designed and built 11 LEED Platinum buildings in Kansas and have also completed 3 Passive Institute certifications. They've won numerous design awards, including 3 AIA Honor Awards, 2 Wood Design Awards, 2-time winner of the NCAR Prize, and 2-time winner of Architect Magazine's Home of the Year. The work of his firm, Rockhill & Associates, is tightly bound to the natural atmosphere and culture of the Kansas region. In the spirit of regionalism, the area's classic forms, frugal methods, and relationship to the nature permeate the results. They are the recipients of numerous awards, most recently Residential Architects Magazines from the year. Everyone please welcome Dan Rockhill.
Thank you. Thank you for coming out. And if on the threat that people may fall asleep, I'm going to just lower these lights a bit there. So thank you for the nice introduction. I appreciate it. And thanks again for coming out. I'm honored to have as many people, especially from the profession here. It's great. It means a lot. So I wear 2 hats, as you might be able to tell from the introduction. So I have the Rockhill & Associates side, and then I have what I do with Studio 804. I've kind of directed this more toward what I do with Studio 804 because we're at a university, everybody's teaching, and students are here, et cetera. And so I thought I would just kind of give a very brief introduction to Rockhill & Associates. So this is a wedding chapel built out on a farm field out of hackberry and felled cottonwood trees, directly on access with the barnyard and the farmstead where the bride grew up. The idea was that the bride would walk down, bride-to-be would walk down this temporary placement of basketball flooring, repurposed under this great lamella arch to the chapel itself, where the event would take place on an October evening. Following the ceremony, the chairs would be pulled back and the event would take place under this great lamella arch. We wanted to make something that didn't involve beams and anything like that, basically something we just make with skill saws. And so it's basically made completely out of 2x10s, and it's 75 foot long and 40 foot wide, and it's clear span, as you can tell. So once you get the calculus applied to figure out all the cuts, it was relatively easy to do. We put a slab down that was only 1.5 inches thick right on top of the brome field. We put some screenings down, or lime dust down first, and then cast a slab over it. And I'm still finding a use for the slab that we just cut up and made into tiles to use for other purposes. So here you see the event once the reception started back under the lamella arch. So as the father of the bride, when my son-in-law to be asked if he could marry my daughter. He's the one on the right over there, and that's me on the left. I said, well, you sure can, Ian, but we got a little work to do first, son. So anyway, these are repurposed telephone poles from a utility expansion or highway expansion. And so I was able to use those. Those are sort of in stock, if you will, for the way I work. And so we put that up and then went ahead and built the lamella as I've described. So this is Kansas, not a whole lot different than Texas, I imagine, but vast horizons and muscular buildings and wheat and Bibles and these beautiful ad hoc assemblies that are sort of dotted across the landscape that were never really designed by architects, but in the end, the results are, I think, just stunning. An over vernacular language that emerges without the input of a design professional ends up being rather beautiful. Trains, rednecks, tin men, which you don't have here, crop dusters, and us. At that time, there wasn't anything that we designed that we didn't also build, and there wasn't anything that we built that we hadn't also designed. There are a few exceptions that you'll see here momentarily, but generally speaking, we do everything. And it was really the only way I could find any comfort level within the client base that I had available to me, which was fairly limited. In the end, it turned out, we would sort of appeal to their pocketbook. They wanted something that was a little bit different. If we were going to be able to do all the building, we could save them some money, and that appealed to them probably more than the design, quite honestly. I live on a farm, so that gives us a lot of freedom. There isn't much of anything that we can't make. So here we're welding steel trusses for another house. We recycle, repurpose a lot of materials. All of these, this what you see here is stainless steel. We bought out a cheese factory that had gone out of business, and all the stainless funnels and fittings and things like that we just bought for the scrap price. So we can make things out of that. Make our own doors and windows. I don't need a steady diet of this, and frankly, I'll never do it again. But for that point in time and what we were trying to do with that particular project, it worked out well. We've done maybe 2 or 3 more times since, but we pretty well, especially with the improvements in window frames, and these are incidentally thermally broken, but we can't compete with industry. So a project like this would be one that we would do in Lawrence, Kansas, in town. We bought a site and moved a house off of it. This is close to the university, so that we could produce this building. These are for clients that both grew up on farms in western Kansas, and they wanted something that would sort of capture the spirit of that. And so when I talked about positive and negative space with them, it's not just the space between the silo and the machinery shed. Instead, it's the space between. It's kind of positive and negative space. They understood immediately and were really drawn toward that kind of analogy. So that's what you see here, basically. A tower, again, reminiscent of these kinds of things that we see out in our landscape about every 15 miles apart. So that establishes and begins to anchor that language. And I'll do anything to sell a client on an idea. So we'd usually trick them into thinking something that would work for them would be just for them to make it special, pretend it to work. So this moves back and forth because they also had an interest in stargazing, and they could slide this thing back with just a boat winch. And you can see right up through dead center on top of that tower, there's a mount that we set up there for them to bring their telescope up and do some stargazing. This is another one we did, an artist studio, very well-known, internationally recognized artist, Roger Shimomura. Basically, it's a 5,000 square foot studio, and so we cast all our own concrete for that. And again, that kind of analogy here to these big cattle shed covers was somehow reminiscent on the roof here. I was fearful throughout my entire career that someday I'd actually have to come to grips with a client that wanted to have garage doors. And the garage doors out there is pretty grim. And so we seized upon these warehouse doors that we just sort of put up backward or put outside, despite their intention is to be inside. We gave the client Canon WD-40, and they're still working now. So anyway, so I like that language, and I'm drawn toward that language where everything is exposed. And so, this kind of stuff, you need a gas tank, well, you just put one on the back, And kind of in the end, this kind of ad hoc assembly turns out to be something that's very beautiful. So, and here we want to make a big thing about getting the water off the roof, so we make these kind of elaborate sculpture-like scuppers that get the water off the roof and down into the drain. We've also restored most of the Kansas historic sites, which is something I'm pretty proud to brag about. Of course, we didn't design those, and we do all the building and we work with the state on it. I had come from New York to Kansas to teach, and so I had a little bit of experience in historic preservation. When I came to Kansas, historic preservation was sort of a novel idea. They hadn't really restored anything. So events that took place at this building led to the term Bleeding Kansas. And so it was pretty significant, and it was a turning point that ultimately led to the Civil War. So this is called Constitution Hall. So we picked that up, dig out underneath it, put everything back under it. We've restored the blockhouse out at Fort Hays. This blockhouse was built in order to protect the railroad workers who were basically building the rail across Kansas ultimately to get to Utah. We went back to the original quarry the soldiers had quarried the stone in 1869. Quarried rock back out to make replacement rock for us to put back in this building. So this is the last intact Pony Express station on the run out of Kansas. Before riders would turn up north, they'd start in Kansas City, Westport, of course go across Kansas, break up into the Nebraska border, and this is the last intact one. This building was really 6 buildings that had been kind of cobbled together. We pick up, move it to the side, put a new foundation under it, put it all back together again. But you learn so much in doing this. This is all made out of walnut, and buildings like that, or you won't see those anymore. And so there's always, doing these autopsies are always very informative, and I like to think somehow comes back and influences the work. The problem with doing all of this is that you sort of become your own worst enemy. Twofold. One is, because you can do everything, you don't know how to hold yourself back, right? So it's like, oh, we're not going to use that toilet paper holder, we'll make one, and you just can't rein yourself in. And so you have to constantly check yourself because, these things lead your life. We're all working with budgets. We all know what that's like. So the other distraction or a disadvantage to doing all this work, despite all the sort of romantic, doing their own building, is you're very limited by a geographical area. I like to be home at night. And so we eventually kind of saturated our area. We're still doing work there, but so when a developer, in this case in Clovis, New Mexico, calls and says, hey, I've seen your work published, we'd like to work with you guys, but, you wouldn't, no. It's the design that motivates me. I happen to be able to do the building, so there's no reason for me not to do it when the time is right. But in this application and others since, I'm quick to grab hold of the design opportunities. So in this project, we did the restoration of the Hotel Clovis, which is what you see in the background there. It was the tallest building west of the Mississippi for quite some time, all the way up through the 1930s, I think. And then in the foreground is a series of housing buildings that we did that would ultimately bring greater density to the downtown area. So it's a combination of a couple of projects that we did there in Clovis. So that's what I do with Rockhill and Associates, but I wanted to emphasize today what I do with Studio 804, which is building with students, and so I can go through this pretty quickly. So we do everything, again, the same kind of thing I just shared with you that I do with Rockhill and Associates is we do everything, we really don't subcontract anything. A lot of times it's a judgment call. The students that I have vary from year to year. My comfort level with them varies every bit as much. And so it just depends on where we are. But generally speaking, the goal is to do as much as the work as we can possibly get done. So I started doing these houses in Lawrence. We had done a couple of little projects out in the country before I started on the houses, and I had been teaching a course called Architecture 804. You might tell from the design studio, and it was the last design studio that students would take before they would graduate. And it's the worst teaching experience you can have. I'm not sure if the colleagues here at San Antonio would agree, but you're literally blocking them from getting on in their lives. They already know it all. They want to work in their portfolio. I said, oh, come on, And so I got good work out of them, but I was always a little frustrated. And I had a project that I couldn't get, Rockhill Associates couldn't get to out in the country. It was a kind of put a roof over a schoolhouse. We were going to do some rock work, but then build this steel roof over it. And I said, would you be interested to the studio? Because I couldn't get to it. And they said, oh, yeah. And of course, I couldn't believe what I saw. They were like drunk on the experience, pulling their cars around at night, so they had the headlights so they could work in the, later. And it was just amazing to see. And you teach long enough and you begin to see those little things that, flourish. And I was immediately taken by it. So I tried another little thing the next year. And pretty soon I was thinking, well, if I'm going to make this work, I better, talk to somebody. So I went to the city of Lawrence and I said, I've got some eager builders and you have an affordable housing initiative. Why don't we get together? They were strapped because this is in the late 90s and that was a booming economy at the time. So they couldn't get builders to do their affordable housing and neighborhood development money was coming in, but they couldn't get builders to pick it up and do the work. So anyway, the short of it is they agreed to do it. And so we went and did 2 projects. This is the second one. The first one they thought we had tricked them on because they asked, what color would it be? And it just, the first one just looked different, and that really irritated them. So this one, they said, now, before we did it, what color will it be? We said, it'll be yellow, it's oh, good, They wanted a kind of creamy Victorian, and of course they got this kind of DeWalt yellow. So this was the last one we did with the city, because, they were like, we just can't have this, it's way too different for what we want. We, at that point, were still able to do everything. At this point, incidentally, I'm doing them in 1 semester, so students would give up their winter break. We wouldn't have a project, we wouldn't have money. I'm not subsidized by the university, so we had to put the whole thing together, get construction documents, get permits, build a building, and be done by graduation in May. So we were really moving through that work. And so I didn't have a lot of time to wring our hands over what would meet the satisfaction of be it the city or the neighborhood association. So anyway, we got through that. So it looked like I was onto something, so I formed a not-for-profit corporation, and we struck an agreement with the university, which is the university has an affiliation agreement. And basically, with our university, they thought we were going to be building like some little gazebos and some things in the park, etc. They said, we know what you're doing. We support the mission of the School of Architecture, and what you're doing also supports that mission, but we don't want to know anything else. So, you're on your own. Good luck. And of course, I was crushed because I had done 2 houses, and of course, in the end, it's the best thing that ever happened to me. So I said, all right, well, okay, if you want to be that way. So then I started to think, I better run this like a business because I've got to get away from having to struggle to find all these connections every year. So this now is the 4th year. This would be our 4th house. And we're still working in that kind of affordable aspect of what we're doing. So we've been doing these houses and selling for $125,000, whatever. And repurposing a lot of materials, because by now the architectural profession in the region knows what we're up to. They want to support us. So in this case, 3 basketball courts were sort of donated because it was an insurance settlement. The architects called and said, hey, they're taking this out. Do you want it? And I'm like, yeah. So we were there, in half an hour, and that's us hauling the wood back out. So we used a lot of basketball flooring. But we put it down, free throw lines and all, it just looked great. So it worked out very well. So I do this not to make them builders by any means. I do this to make them better architects. And I also do this because over the course of my teaching career, I've just seen an amazing change culturally in what's happening to us. I have very different students now than I did a long time ago. And I think a lot of it comes from what I'm going to talk about here very quickly, which is the sort of age of consumerism where everything, you can get anything you want. So the kids who built this little tree fort, they had to kind of struggle to get a board up and figure out how to fasten it and maybe cut something and keep from falling through, all the kinds of things that, and it may not be the best example, but this is now the shit that we get, this is what you see all over. And these things are very likely prohibited from most neighborhoods because it would be a little untidy. But these things are totally acceptable. And so these kids then are sort of denied that experience. And again, probably not the best example, but I come from an age where this is how we lived. We were always doing stuff with cars, et cetera, et cetera. And I'd be happy to see a kid in my studio, takes his or her hubcaps off. It would be great. Just the idea that you'd make an intervention into what you're given, and try to make it something that's special for you. I don't see that much of that. So, you know, just can't help but point out that in Lawrence this year, they opened a Halloween costume shop. Now, this is a little town of 80,000. Create a toga out of a sheet, you know, and had, you know, whatever it is that you would make, and you'd have to think through and solve very simple problems, but you would engage design. But now, because again of consumerism, you just go and buy whatever you want at the Halloween shop. So all of this is getting away from us, and I think it affects the way in which young people think. They can do many other wonderful things, and I apologize to anybody here that feels insulted by that, but it's a very different world. And I'm not the only one who thinks that. The literature is all over the place. All of these books are basically addressing the same thing. So anyway, I'm not alone. Anyway, I feel like whatever I can contribute to it, and I have what I call, in fact, my students, when I said I was coming here, they said, you're not going to tell them about any Studio 804 moments, are you? Because they have it all day long. You know, they just, the things that they do, you know, it just cracks me up. And it's just their own innocence, but they haven't been exposed to a lot of things. And so I'll show you one or two here as I get along. So anyway, so we did the 5 houses in Lawrence, and we kind of ran out of property. I didn't want to do any more projects out in the Habitat for Humanity subdivision, which was the last one we had done, not the one I shared with you, but one I haven't shared. And so we went to Kansas City, and Kansas City is like a poster child for basically the flight to suburbia. I know Detroit gets all the attention, but these yellow dots represent 5 vacant parcels. And it's not vacant of structure necessarily, it's basically vacant in the tax base. And so basically, Kansas City, Kansas is decimated. So we went to them, and I said to the CDC, the Community Development Corporations, they had about a dozen of them within, a glorified name for neighborhood associations. I went to them and I said, you know, I've got some eager builders, and brace yourselves, here's what we do. It might look a little different, but you know, what do you think? And so Wendy Wilson of Rosedale Neighborhood Association said, yeah, this is all right, let's go for it. So anyway, then I was faced with the problem that my students were going to be commuting back and forth on I-70, the interstate, you know, at 12 o'clock at night, and that didn't sit right with me. I didn't want to build it on site. I wanted to figure out a way to minimize that commute. So we seized upon this idea of prefabricating it. At the same time, the entire world became fascinated with prefabrication. I'd like to imagine that I had some connectedness to that, but it was quite accidental. I just did it to get through this, and suddenly everybody's interested in what we're doing, which was nice. So anyway, so we figured out a way to make it in a warehouse. We're in an abandoned warehouse, and we figured out a way to make the whole thing, and then we truck it to the site and boom it into position. Finish it out. This is one of the first that won the Home of the Year award. You know, and we're competing, it's a blind submission, and we're competing with professionals who are, you know, they have $5 million buildings. You know, we sold this for $145,000. And so it was nice to see this shine in light of all of the competition. So I'm happy to get that result. You know, we are completely independent of the university, so I'm not subsidized, so we are literally hauling 2x4s and plywood and everything in our Hondas back and forth to the job site, anything to make this thing work. And so, and I continue to be completely independent of the university, so and what I'm starting to do now is realize that I can sell these, but I have to try to sell them at market rate if I can. I need to try to get as much out of these houses as I can, so I can continually slice off what might be construed as profit to put back into the program. So eventually I could become my own developer, because at this point I'm still working with the community development corporations, and you know, they're a little concerned, because even though the work looks different, they're beginning to get a reputation. They don't like the kind of pushback. This is all very conservative where I live, so. Anyway, so we sold the first one, word of mouth, that was great, and we sold the second one. This is the third one now that we did, and it seemed to be going very well. They were all sold, as I've said, easily. We never had to advertise anything. Once we got on that word of mouth, it seemed to work extremely well. And then people were beginning to kind of get in line, writing to me an email and saying, hey, you know, we'd like to have one of the houses, et cetera. I mean, they can see a good deal. You know, because they understand the labor is free. I'm still trying to get something more out of it than just the materials. But anyway, so this, Kenny and Leo were happy, couldn't have been happier. They're willing to put aside the reservations that most of the realtors will give about resaleability, schools, all the kinds of things that discourage people from settling in these older urban neighborhoods. But we were finding, these young people, they all read Dwell magazine, they want something hip. They don't care if they're the only non-English as a first language couple in a 20 square block area. They could care less. They want to be able to walk to the amenities. Anyway, it was really coming together, and this was the sort of client base that we were attracting. And so that was going extremely well, and we were in some pretty rough neighborhoods. This was our neighbor right here. You're looking at Kansas City, Missouri across the river on the other side. Now we even have builders who are doing knockoffs, because most of these are builder houses. Most of the builders, you can imagine, they have the kind of faux stone, wallpaper in the front, the kind of ionic columns, a lot of kind of goofy stuff that they thought was selling, and our client base was walking right by that stuff and buying our houses. So they got smart pretty quick and figured out they were going to try to do something that was kind of a knockoff. So. Now Lester here, he lives across the alley, and he mowed his lawn, he said, for the first time in 20 years. He couldn't believe that people were interested in his neighborhood. So we were onto a pretty good thing. We had some setbacks. This is our fourth house in Kansas City. This is a pretty waspy neighborhood. They protested heavily. A lot of it is because the students would swarm down onto a site. They don't understand that people who live in houses are aware of what's around them, and suddenly you get 20 students walking around on a site, taking pictures and so on. Hey, what's going on? Pretty soon it gets on the grapevine, and they get a little momentum in the neighborhood to push back and resist what we're doing. The word, I'll never forget, that they said that our work would attract undesirables into their neighborhood. So that being said, we went to another site, a brownfield site, and built this house. And this house, by now, I figured out I absolutely have got to make this work more finely as a business. So here, we prefabricated all this, and these big cabinets roll apart. So I don't expect you're able to see this very easily, but so when I take the appraiser through, I got 1 bedroom, 2 bedrooms, and 3 bedrooms because we slid those cabinets apart. When I take the urban hipster who reads Dwell magazine and wants loft living, we've moved all the cabinets down over here, so it's a big open area. And you're like, yeah, we like this. So anyway, so we get the 3-bedroom appraisal, and we can trick the appraiser and pull these things apart, and it has that kind of potential, and it actually did work. We sold this last one for $200,000. So then there was a tornado that came into Kansas. We're, of course, known for that, as you may know. Texas has a few as well, called in Greensburg, Kansas, and it wiped out this little town. And we went down there and did a project. This is a Google map before. This is Google map after. I'm in a helicopter here. Dodge City is 40 miles to the right, and Pratt, Kansas is 35 miles to the left. Absolutely flat ground. Tornado came right, and nothing in between. Tornado came right up through that town and basically wiped the town out. There were 11 people, unfortunately, but passed away. More, fortunately, were saved because they had enough warning. So anyway, we went down there and made a presentation. They had already decided that the city was going to build back green. Bob Berkebile, whom you may recognize the name, a leader in sustainability, his office, BNIM in Kansas City, had already made contact with them down there, and they were beginning to come back to build green for any of the city buildings. So we said, well, yeah, we can do that. Let's go for it. And this was the first, we'd already been doing a lot of that, but this is also the first time that LEED had really begun to be something we could work with to make submissions. These are the city commissioners, they just didn't know what to do with us. You can see them, again, the buildings look different, they're kind of rattled, they don't know what to make. There's a big K-State, KU kind of rivalry, we're a K-State country. And they said, well, it looks kind of arty, doesn't it? And you sit here thinking, and they said, well, we need an art center. Like, you need an art center, there's like nothing left in the town. I like art, but you need a firehouse, or something like that. No, you need an art center. And so basically, this is what's left. There's nothing there. And this will be our site. So they put together a little art center board, and we met with them and put together the project. First, we had to get 4 contiguous pieces of property that we could take ownership of through the art center. And one person was in jail in Junction City. We had to get him to sign the deed over. We're still starting these in January, and we're going to be done. So this is pretty intense. So students are getting the deeds signed over. We're getting the property, 4 contiguous ones that'll give us a broad south exposure, which is what you see here. And so this is the end result, is what you see here in glass. Looking to the south. Now, just in case we didn't have enough on our plate, in Kansas, right next door to us, no more than 15 miles away, is the largest, now former largest production ammunition facility in the world. A 10,000-acre site called Sunflower Ammunition, and they would make loads for howitzer, Navy ships, howitzers, bushel basket-sized loads, not bullets. 10,000-acre site, 5,000 buildings, and this is now going back through the process where they're trying to get it back into the public realm. They've demolished some of the buildings. We went to them, to the attorneys basically in New Orleans, and said, hey, we want to get some of those materials. You can imagine what we had to go through to get there, but the poetry of taking what had been basically a magazine building, for which this is one of 5,000 that were on the site, and kind of putting that into the art center was a little too much to resist. So anyway, we went through, stripped that building out, brought it back to our site, and eventually then used it. Now we're in a different abandoned warehouse. Use it to put together this, the same kind of dance you've seen ourselves do before. Prefabricated in the warehouse. This time we took the side of the building out, loaded it with a crane, head down, raining hard. March 17th, St. Patrick's Day, we went down there. We were down there for 2 months putting this all together. Take it down, drop the trailers. It's like a scene right out of MASH, yet they haven't even really rebuilt. So here's the hospital, so there wasn't much of anything left of it. So all the trees are torqued. We have to take all the trees out. It was an F5 tornado, so 200-mile-an-hour winds. So we load these off and get them up, and then nudge them into place. To get the slings out, you have to leave them apart. Get the slings out, and then we just roll them into place, into position. The only other thing that was back now was they were starting to rebuild the water tower. It too had been knocked out. You can see us in the foreground, and this is the old water tower that had been taken out. So it's also a minefield. Nobody knows where anything is. This guy thought he did. So you've got tornado shelters, septic tanks, all kinds of stuff that everything is gone. You have no reference points anymore. This is actually our job, and he insisted that we were in the way, and the truck went in. So. You go down there at that point in time and you talk to the concrete ready-mix producer about fly ash, and he's like, what's that? And so I explained, and you're going to get in the business here, you may want to find out what's going on. And they did a remarkably good job. We probably placed over 200 yards of concrete, all of it with 20 or 30% fly ash, so did a good job. So concrete slab for thermal mass, all passive solar, south-facing windows, calculated shading. And then the idea that this would open out to the public was something I thought was really important. The artists don't care for that because the light affects the artwork, but that wasn't the only thing we were doing there. So we wanted to make this airplane hangar door, so you can see this happen here. So that gestures out to the public, and so here you see it in the foreground. Now the elevation in that part of the country, in Kansas, changes about a half an inch over 400 miles. I mean, it is really flat. And we just couldn't quite put this building down on that same ground. We wanted to elevate the building at least to give it a greater prominence. And the other part of that was it would enable this to happen, because all that wall is purposely designed at 16 inches, which is kind of the height of a chair. People could sit on it and use it as you see being used here. And that was really an important part of this. The sustainable aspects of this include 3 turbines. We could have done it with one big one. It looked kind of lonely. 2 looked like a couple. 3 looked great. And these were kestrels. They're from South Africa. Just the design of it looked appealing to me. So here we are putting the foundations in and getting ready to put it up. we figured on the other ones, we put the turbine on before we put the pole up. So that's a Studio 4 moment there for you. So all glass on the outside, it's all 3/8 glass. This is from Suntex. It's from Vitra. I'm blank on the name all of a sudden, but anyway, what it does is it filters the UV rays. So on the wall you see in wood, we have the wood from the ammunition facility, and then we filter that with these panels of glass that have this UV film that's in it that helps minimize the deterioration of that wood from the sun. And it also kind of thumbs our nose at the tornado business. It's very heavy glass, it's 3/8, so there's the finished product. You know, this detailing stuff is always fun. I think there's one up there that says garden hose. You know, we had to have some kind of little buffer in there, so we try to make these things up. Those kind of spider fittings that are now everywhere, they're just a little too predictable, so we wanted to make something. So anyway, make a project out of it. So some happy graduates, and we move on. They use it as an art center. They also have city commission meetings there. They use it in a lot of different ways. A lot of events take place, and so I'm pretty proud of it. This is one of my proudest moments, which is the National Retired Rodeo Clown Association photo of the year for their calendar taken in front of our building. So I feel pretty proud about that. So then I stagger back up to school, you know, because we finish these things and then there's a whole other group of students, oh, what are we going to do, you know, and so I'm like, oh my God, I'm exhausted. But okay, well, we're going to do the first LEED Platinum. That was the first LEED Platinum, incidentally, in Kansas, in Greensburg, and so we're going to keep this LEED Platinum thing going. So this is the second one, and this is in Kansas City, Kansas now, and this is all done in Coomeroo. It runs up and over it. Never cared for photovoltaics, even though you'll see me using them. PVs on the roof, when you get it in the right light, it just kind of looks like postage stamps. So in this example, the roof runs up and over it in the Coomeroo. So I just thought that was nice. And then here's the broad south exposure. The interior, this is black epoxy on that floor. And it's like that kind of sea of gloss and anyway, so, and then light coming in on the south edge as well, west edge, pardon me. The big accomplishment with this, you know, you'll find that when you practice long enough, there are a few things that you're incredibly proud of, and in this case, getting the refrigerator out of the kitchen. Fisher Paykel had just come out with these draw models, so we could have them under the counter, and that just was so much nicer than having that big elephant literally in the room. So there's two refrigerator drawers under the countertop there that solve that problem. We have a freezer out in the garage. And the people who eventually bought it love the way it works. So anyway, but we wanted that refinement to reflect that. So it was a big moment. Glass enclosed stairwell coming down is actually the only walls that really give definition to the space, both upstairs and downstairs. Here's the PVs on the roof. Vertical axis wind turbine in the back. So that was LEED Platinum as well. So now this is going to be a LEED Platinum, and this is also passive certified. This is the first passive certified that we did. And this is now on another piece of property. Now we just have enough money. I've graduated from having to go to these the CDCs. We have enough money in the bank because I've been able to do these projects that I can save enough that I can basically get the property. In this case, this property all in the inner city is $300. 2 lots here. It's through the Homesteading Act. You know, they're trying to infuse interest into the urban area, so they'll give you the property, basically. $300 is nothing. So anyway, so we get the property, and then we build a house, and I can sell it, and we start then getting a little bit more profit. So I can basically be a developer, which has always been my goal. So we do all the traditional crafts as well. So, you know, soldering gutters, 3-coat stucco. I don't care for acrylic stucco. By now, you know, we did all that work in Greensburg, and the dean of the school was a little red-faced because people would come, parents would come. We published internationally with that work, and parents would come and say, you know, they're in an abandoned warehouse. There's no heat. The girls are having to go to the quick shop to use the toilet. You know, you have to run an extension cord from the back of the quick shop to have power, or generators, whatever. Can we do a little bit better than that? So anyway, he ended up buying and paying off solar as well. Passive is a little more difficult to attain, passive house certification, than LEED, but LEED, that's not to minimize LEED either. But the passive stuff really works pretty well. So here we do flat work in order to get some thermal mass upstairs on the floor. TJIs we use for the depth of section to increase the thermal performance in all the walls. Blower door test before we close in tight enough. You can see all the construction joints have been caulked. We go around with a smoke pencil to see if we fail to get that as tight as it should be. Here's a Studio 804 moment. The floor, we do the flat work and then we would put curing compound on it. Curing compound is like the consistency of like honey. And you put it in a pump sprayer, you spray it out, it sprays out evenly, and it scuffs off over time so the moisture isn't taken out of the slag too fast and causes it to crack. So I just can't be there to do all this stuff, and garden sprayers are notoriously difficult. I said, here, pour to the students, pour this in here, make sure that you get that as even as you can. So they think that the end of the garden sprayer is actually a plug that's in there. So they take that little thing out that causes the fan, and then the stuff comes shooting out like a fire hose, and they thought, well, yeah, that's the way it's supposed to work. So it's just all over the place in various thicknesses, it's just gummy, So I come in the next day, and I'm like, what did you do, What'd you call me, Oh, we thought that was the way it's supposed to be. So I have Leon just livid, and I'm like, oh my God, okay, we're going to build a house, we're busy here, we can't mess with that. So we build the whole house because we run out of time, we end up having a big open house. Everybody comes in, and they go, man, the floors are awesome, how'd you do that? And I'm like, oh, yeah, it's an old trick. So, anyway, yeah, stupid things that happen that end up working out quite nicely. So, anyway, so all the windows in this house came from Zek, came from Austria. At this time, none of the North American suppliers could actually meet the standard for passive house, the performance of the frames and the glass as well. So we're lucky because we're kind of pushing that envelope, so we get a lot of companies that want to give us some favorable pricing and work with us. So there's that one done. So then I couldn't sell those last two houses. The one I just shared with you, the black house, and the one prior to that with the cooler on the roof. Never sold because the bottom fell out of the industry, right? The housing crisis. So that was 09 and 10. So I didn't have anything that I could do. I leased those out. People were sort of renting them. And so the dean of the school said, what are you going to do? I said, I don't know. I said, well, we got a little thing you could maybe do a little addition to or something. So this is all done in stone. I'll explain that in a moment. This is a limestone skin on the outside that kind of fades into just glazing, as you can tell. I'm sort of enamored of this idea of a tron wall. Any of you that would be familiar with the old tron walls from the 70s, they're just terrible to look at. And so I wanted to do something, the idea that this skin would jump back with the limestone, and then we'd have this electrochromic glass that's over the top of it. So same thing, big thick TJI, standard walls up, maximum insulation. We make our own curtain wall in this example. Curtain wall is 2x4 aluminum extrusion or 2x4 aluminum extrusion. I mean, other than increasing the depth, it's also about as grim as garage doors. But the idea that we can make this at a 5/8 inch bar stock, we could still get a thermal break because we found an extrusion we could use to do that with. So we make our own curtain wall, and that's what you see us doing here. And then we put this up. This is electrochromic glass, so it's going to be self-shading. I'll show you how that happens in a moment. But all the glass gets wired with low voltage wiring. We put that in. So they're tied to our GPS coordinates. It's controlled by a motherboard in Minneapolis, and they know when the sun rises and sets. So they can control the shading of it per the season. And they can even take into account if there's a tree that would block it. So it's pretty interesting technology. And again, because we're doing these kinds of things, we get industry, looking favorably to try to partner with us. So it works out pretty well. And for once, I didn't have to do louvers because I'd spent my entire career doing louvers on the south side of the buildings. This is a 10,000 plant living wall that is thriving. This is Valcucine, which is an Italian line of cabinetry. They also worked with us. All of their line of cabinetry is glass and aluminum, all 100% recyclable. So here's the limestone. These are tailings that we get. So the limestone people were happy to just have us, pay for the freight and haul it off. And we bring it into the warehouse and cut it all up into a coursing that we could use. And so that's what you saw there, all made out of limestone. Then we did another project over in Kansas City at the community college. They wanted a sustainability center. Again, the previous one was LEED Platinum. That was also the first commercial building that was Passive House certified as well, the previous one. So we went and did this one. This one we made out of chalkboard slate, which is kind of interesting. Of course, I think most people, I hope, understand that, well, that's sort of faux slate. But, in grade schools years ago, they literally had slate, which is a building material, on the walls. And when the demo contractors come in and knock out all these old grade schools, they know it's of some value. So we bought in Cleveland, Des Moines, and Minneapolis 3 truckloads of chalkboard slate. And then we cut all that up and basically just screw it to the outside of the building. This building we did is EcoHawks, and I was talking with some others here. It always takes somebody who believes in you to make these kind of projects work. And Joanne Browning, who is now the dean of your School of Engineering here, was at KU and worked with us on this building. And she said the nicest thing, we varied from the design vocabulary that the architects had sort of designated. We have our campus architects, if you will. And they had designated a design vocabulary for this whole West Campus development. It just wasn't anything that I warmed up to very easily. We were doing work here for mechanical engineering. They convert cars to battery and they research. Long story, you'll see in a moment. But this language of aluminum and fabrication was really important. So we made the skin, and proposed making the skin, and the university people, they didn't see anything nice about it. They said, you can't do that. And Joanne Browning said, oh, yes, they can. We're paying for this. And this is beautiful. So anyway, so this is skin that we developed. Three young women here worked on it and really pulled it off. A lot of this came through with VaproShield's development. They're the ones who give us the rain screen on the outside. That's the black. And they had just come out with a product that was basically super UV resistant. We'd always struggled with rain screens because the UV deterioration was always our nemesis. They wouldn't last that long. So in this one, they had just developed this and they were behind us to do this project. So anyway, that's what you see there. And there's the finished project. And this is the inside. This is kind of what they do. It's basically for graduate students in mechanical engineering who become part of this program that I've described. So then we did an addition to Marvin Hall. This is the School of Architecture now. And this is an addition that has been talked about for as long as I've been at that school, and probably started long before that. It was built as an engineering building, and they never had anything where groups could congregate. So all of our students were taking lecture courses in other buildings around campus. We counted 23 courses that people going elsewhere. So we got to do something. So we eventually convinced the university to let us go ahead and do this addition to the School of Architecture. So continuing with that sort of spirit of design and sustainability, what we have here is we've sort of mimicked the original structure to the old building, which is basically a timber frame inside with the stone walls, limestone walls on the outside. And in this case, what I thought was really important to try to do was to pursue a double wall. So in this case, what's happening is there are 2 walls here that you can't discern very easily. They're about 40 inches apart. They're glass. So the glass on the inside is not the same glass that's on the outside. And within that are these louvers, and you'll see all this in a moment. And then this elevated floor kind of begins to be something else that you'll understand here in a moment for positive displacement, for ventilation. Both of these are sort of driven by our interest in LEED. And so the other part that kind of makes a project like this crazy is you're behind Marvin Hall. All the infrastructures come in there over the history of the building, for 120 years, and nobody really knows where anything is. They didn't start to document anything that was underground until maybe in 1980, but all that stuff that was under there. So we were sort of picking through a minefield, and a lot of times they'd say, we don't know, cut it, and good luck. So anyway, we finally got through it all, but it took quite a bit to get the foundation in. So here we do grade beams that are basically standing on top of 14-foot deep drilled piers in the shale, pick up those loads, and then we get that back, do our form work to go ahead and make what you see here to get the beams, and then we ultimately set the building on top of that. So, and then put up our own timber. You see here, engineered lumber frame on top, and then start to get closed in. And then the louvers go in. So we set the glass on the inside, then we set the louvers, then we set the glass on the outside. And the louvers basically track the sun, and their purpose is not only to control the heating within the space or lack of heating. So if you imagine in the wintertime, when the air between the two spaces is trapped, it's like when you go to your car in the wintertime and it's been in the sun, it's actually kind of warm inside. It's not nearly as cold as it is outside. So that's the most rudimentary concept. It's kind of like a warm blanket. But then in the summertime, when we don't want it to overheat, we have louvers on the bottom here behind these grills, dampers that open and then open up above here, so you get the stack effect, and it kind of pulls cool air in from on the underside of the building. So it's kind of simple, but I'm pretty sure it works fairly well. We make our own glass. This is a cassette system, so we get the glass from, this is Oldcastle. We bring that in, and then we do a silicone, an epoxy silicone. It's a clip system, and you'll see here in a moment. We bring these sheets over after it's cured, and then we boom them in. But the difference is, I like that smooth surface, not these snap-on grills on the outside. So you'll see here, we set it on the inside. This is basically, we call it wet glazing. So we put the whole thing together that way. So here we are setting the inside glass, set the louvers all the way around. That's clear Western red cedar, all hard. And then boom these up in, start getting closure on the outside. And it's a little, sometimes we resort to sort of the Egyptian technique. That's a block and tackle that's pulling that glass up, because we have to have the scaffolding to work off of, and I can't get through that with the forklift, so we just pull them up with the block and tackle and set them in. And then when it slides in and slides over, it's very, very tight tolerances to do this. And then we can caulk that in, we get that butt glaze, so it's absolutely smooth on the glass surface. So positive displacement floor system. So in LEED, what we try to do is we minimize the set points for when we actually dump tempered air in, be it cooled or warmed. So you spread out that temperature range between, say, 55 and 75 degrees. So when it's like that, we can bring natural air into the building, and it comes in under the floor. And so what we're doing here is we can open louvers here. It pulls air through the building with fans up here and ventilates it up through the top. Positive displacement ventilation. And again, it minimizes how much we're using the mechanical system for. We're just gently moving air through the space, and that seemed to be pretty successful as well. So we redo the interior, the way you gain access to it to get to the space as well, and then a living wall in the back. There's the finished images, and then we have a little jury room behind the lecture hall as well, because we displaced the jury room in order to get the old jury room in order to get through it, which is now the Commons, and then get into this new jury room. So we finished that. I'll pick up the pace here a little bit. Went back to doing houses, and this is another passive certified house. The average monthly bill for this house is $17 for all electric house, and $14 of that is the setup fee. I do all these projects, but I just don't have the time to be able to go back and reflect. Fortunately, the person that the sort of numbers nerd that we sold this to loves to do this, and so he's the one who's given me these numbers, Mark. And so that stuff works. It's pretty amazing in our climate that you can heat and cool a house year-round for $17 a month. So this is, again, some of the stuff you have to do in order to get those bragging rights. So a lot of insulation in the foundation under it. This is a double wall construction, so we have a 2x4 and a 2x6 wall construction that you see here. So we're picking up the load of the roof on the 2x6, but inside of that is a 2x4 wall as well. So that gives us the increased depth of section. 100 panels on the roof to get more insulation above that, and there's the finished interior on it. Photovoltaics on the roof to generate power. Again, get what I'm talking about. So here's another one coming down the home stretch here. So this one is all made out of repurposed cedar. This is kind of an interesting story. Well, there's Alyssa there. I couldn't resist putting the picture. One of my students is here, and she'd gone through the program, so I thought I'd embarrass her for a moment. She put the concrete in. So this house is made out of Western red cedar, and the interesting story about this is it comes from these kind of constructs. So in the growth of the housing industry in the late 1800s into the early 1900s, the logging companies would descend upon these locales, in Washington State, Oregon, you can imagine, mountainous kind of hilly whatever, and they would have to build bridges in order to get these train cars in so they could basically load them, the flat cars, and get the material out. And they would use what was at hand, which is basically Western red cedar. And so, and the stuff really never rots. So now, this stuff is available, and we buy from someone who bids these projects to be able to take apart this material, and then he mills it into whatever sizes I want, which are basically enough so it'll stack on a truck, 8 by 2 or 8 by 3, whatever would break out the best, and it's clear Western red cedar. And then so he ships it to us, and then we go ahead and repurpose it into what you see here. We mill it all down into exactly the size we want. This happened to be a project that was in the environs of a listed house, so we had to have that kind of coursing and the way the windows are broken up and so on, all to fit the Historic Resources Commission requirements. And then these are also trackable, so south glazing, but in this case, in this case, we use basically barn doors on the outside so somebody could modulate that as much as they want to close off those south windows when they felt it was necessary. There's enough light coming through the spaces on those doors that it makes it kind of interesting on the inside as well. So repurposed marble throughout the kitchen that you see there as well from a skyscraper in Kansas City, the lobby made out of marble. And then we finish there. And I'll speed up here. So this is another house out of repurposed materials, kind of getting old, but this is made out of metal span. We repurposed this from a tennis pavilion. The company that manufactured it, they had some blemishes in the paint job, wanted to know if we would take the donation. And I said, yeah, sure. So basically it's a 3-inch panel, it's an R26, and we snap those together. It's our color choice to do the black, and then we do a full cellulose fiber 2-6 wall behind that. And then these screens. So we do our own flat work. Again, we do everything. I call this poor man's terrazzo. So as soon as we knock that slab off, we let it cure enough, a couple days, and we come on it with these diamond pads now. We can grind that head down, and you get a very inexpensive, very interesting floor by just doing that. And we can, the diamond pads, although pricey, are a whole lot cheaper than what a terrazzo floor would cost or any other concrete. So it worked out pretty well for us. So there's the finished interior there. And this is the last one. So this is a house also made completely out of repurposed materials. Because of that big warehouse now, I can stockpile a lot of things. And so I can take glass in, we store it, and I think I've had this glass that you see on this building for the last probably 6 years, until we could finally find a use for it. So this house is in an RS7 zoning. The city is trying to increase the density in the urban area, and so I'm all for that. So in this case, not only, of course, do we have the 3-bedroom house, but we also have the accessory dwelling. So the people that bought that now, they can't meet the demand for the Airbnb. They have so many inquiries in that accessory dwelling. So the tree that you see here is a 400-year-old bur oak tree. And we own both pieces of property. The tree actually has a landscape easement around it. The whole focus of it, as you can tell, is toward that tree and that landscape, which is just beautiful. So very simple form. Again, flat work. In this case, it's in a floodplain, and so what we want to do is elevate the building above the floodplain. I love when you sort of turn what you think is your greatest liability into your greatest asset, which in this case is the cantilever. So the building basically cantilevers over all that concrete above the floodplain, which is of course what we had to meet. But then we sort of turned that into something else. So here we are putting the glass up on the outside. We're always in trouble when we come to do our roofing because usually it's this time of year, January, February, we're trying to get closed in and we can't do it in the old EPDM TPO systems that are fully adhered because you can't use the adhesives unless it's a constant 40 degrees. And that's not by us going to happen. So now we use this Rhino bond, which is pretty interesting, which is basically, it uses induction heating technology. So we put the plates in and you see that on top of the insulated deck. So we do a tapered drainage system on top of the flat deck. And then this melts on top of the washers and bonds the underside of the TPO to it. And so you're not using adhesives, so therefore it's not temperature sensitive. It's pretty interesting technology and lets us do that then in bad weather or cold weather. So here's the interior of that. I think that's my last slide. So the Studio 804 book is available from online retailers, and anybody that's interested, we're always looking for students, so don't hesitate to seek me out. So how about some questions? Sorry, I kind of went over a little bit, I think. Any questions?
I have a question.
Yeah.
What are you doing for your structural and mechanical design? Are you using a normal consultant or are you doing that yourself?
On the university, yeah, on the university project, the MEPs need to be sealed. And so in that case, we have engineers that we've used in the past, and they're happy to work with us. The students are part of those conversations, but it's only for the 4 larger buildings that we've done that we've had to do that. For the other 20 buildings, anymore, most of it now, any of the engineering that has to be done, we're getting it through the suppliers so that Samsung, for instance, they'll send their engineers to our job sites and students will work with them. Those engineers will spec the mini splits. Everybody wants to use mini splits now by us. And they'll spec that. We run all the line set, all the low voltage wiring to it, take care of it, set the hangers for it, get the condensate lines in, and then we'll hang it, but we don't charge the system with refrigerant. So that's about where I draw the line, because I don't want the responsibility of the maintenance on it, In the electric, we'll do all the electric, including service entrance, 200 amp, almost standard issue. Plumbing, we set the fixtures, eyeball the rough in, but we don't do the PEX, and having had a bad experience or two. And then on the drain lines, we don't touch it because they got a whole 5 pounds and the plumbers don't want to mess with it. So I have the plumbers do that. But we do all the bathroom design, so as you can imagine. But those are the exceptions to just about all of the possible subcontracts, if you will. We do it under their license as well. Even though I can do it as owner-builder, because I own the properties now, we can do that. So there's always a way around that. And the city does like what we do because it's just different. They're well built, extremely well made, and they kind of enjoy coming in and seeing it and talking to students and so on, the inspectors, So, more questions, anybody?
Dan, the way the students are doing the glazing systems, and for a minute there, I thought you made your own glass. You use glass and make your own glazing system.
Yeah, well, I have like 400 sheets. I put up the interior of a mall, which is all single, quarter-inch, 4x8 sheets, the whole interior. And we were flirting with the possibility of maybe making them. I don't need to. That's about my limit. I've done that before. What if we've done something wrong there? I don't need to push that envelope quite that far. But in terms of getting that cassette system so it worked, we did put those on. So Oldcastle would supply the glass, 1-inch insulated glass, and then on the back of that, so you're not setting it on in a mullion system. You're actually clipping it into it is a mullion, but it's clipped into a frame and it's in front of it. So that way you're left with roughly about inch space between your glass, and then that's what we basically silicone in, Baccarat behind it and silicone it, if that's your question.
Well, yes, on that second part was that it's amazing that the students, I think that's the most difficult task in all of these building systems you have is setting that glass. And the fact that you're doing it, you know, like an Egyptian or an old sailor,
Right.
is just because the
thanks.
tolerances, they have to,
Yeah.
it has to be right on, or else you're gonna chip and.
Yeah, the one that is the university one, that's a Florida ceiling glass, two-story glass corner on that. So the 1-inch insulating glass, the outer sheet continues in order to wrap it, if you will, for the joint. And so, yeah, those are challenges, right. And, you know, students have no idea, you know, what plumb, square, true, you name it. It's all, you know, it's all done in AutoCAD or Revit now. You know, you know, what is this level business? You know, what are you talking about? You know? So it's completely foreign to them. So kind of setting that stage and getting an understanding of that is, yeah, it takes a little bit of, learning curve's pretty much straight up, so, yeah.
But it has to be because you're cycling the students every semester or every year, right?
Every year.
So everybody
Yeah,
has
every
to
year.
learn that again.
Oh, yeah,
Aye.
right, so, yeah. Uh-huh.
Can you go describe the process of each typical house a little bit more as far as the length of time and what amount of time goes into design,
Sure.
construction document, and
I
construction?
try to get a piece of property as soon as possible. I involve, the students are involved in that as well. So again, students do everything. I don't make a phone call if I can avoid it. I mean, that's how I operate this. There's a lot of coaching, as you can imagine. So I don't make a phone call if I can help it. So I have the students start to look for property, of course they're pretty clueless. And so pretty soon though, we've put together, you know, kind of a collection of potential properties, and we discuss it all and the pluses and minuses, and we buy a piece of property. While we're waiting for that to go through, which might take a month, at least we know where we're gonna be, because we've had to flush out, you know, from a half a dozen candidates. Then we start the design process, you know, south orientation, neighborhood studies, things like that. But in the end, I let them swim around for a while. It could take as long as a week and a half to 2 weeks. They have to bring me something every day in terms of design work. And, you know, they're, again, I'm not doing this so I can make fun of students, but they have no experience, they know nothing about structure. You can imagine what their studio experience has been like. You know, so we've got, you know, bells and whistles and walkout decks and ponds, oh, you know, you name it, they have no idea what budgets are. And so, and when I begin to say, whoa, wait a minute, you're a little out of control here, I think. You know, and so we budget the whole building, and we do now, because we have this track record, we can do this sort of autopsy on the year before. And how much did we spend on HVAC? How much did we spend on siding? You know, and so they can begin to see the numbers start to fill in, and the thing mushrooms. I said, well, what are we targeting here for a price? You know, $250,000. You know, you got a $800,000 project here. So that begins to ratchet them down. But after a while, we'll have talked about everything that I think is important. And, you know, then at some point I'll say enough. You know, I'm going to share a little something with you, which reflects everything that we've talked about, but it is a little bit more refined, if you will. You know, and I tell them, you know, if you work in an office that cares about design, if you work in Ted Flato's office, you know, he doesn't say to somebody who comes in, do whatever the hell you want, I don't care, you know. It's not a free-for-all, you know. There's got to be a language that is really important that reflects, in my case, the studio. So I don't hold back in terms of saying, whoa, let's just take it easy here. You know, if you look at all these projects, they're actually very small rectangular boxes that couldn't be simpler. And that's by design. And I happen to like that aesthetic, but it also fits what we're trying to do with students, because we are really all over the place with design. So I get them through that, we get settled, and they understand in the end, because I'm just maybe giving it a little bit of form. It's not always the case, but when I see that we're not moving with the pace I think we should, I don't hold back. I'll give it just a little bit of form, and then I'll say, okay, and when we're done, I'll bet you're gonna learn that this is your building, because we can't, you're going to learn that it's in the details that the architecture really begins to come to life. And sure enough, in the end, nobody has ever criticized the fact that I gave the EcoHawks building, you know, the 3 boxes that are there. Those are 30-foot square boxes. Settle down. We were all over on that building with the woven aluminum. You're losing control. Let's just keep it simple and let the architecture kind of begin to speak. And that's what they learn in that process. So. And it takes a little bit for us to get through to that point. We go ahead and we submit for permits as soon as possible. as soon as we get the design down, and then we basically go through all the shop development on it. So the city doesn't care about the interior finishes or whatever, you know. And so we're able to then develop all those stuff while we're waiting to get permits. And as soon as that breaks, we're out there in the field. And if the weather is bad, it was 23 degrees below zero this morning when I left. 7 degrees with a 30-mile-an-hour wind. So I think they're in the warehouse, or more in the warehouse today. So we take those days to then retreat back and see, okay, well, you know, where do we stand? How are we going to make this wall panel? And what's that? You know, there's a lot of detail in that can go on continuously, if that helps. But I'm pushing them because it's not in their DNA. They don't understand productivity. That's my biggest obstacle.
Is that a 12-month process?
Pardon me?
Is that a 12-month process from?
I start with them in August, and they all graduate in May. And they take this year it was 2 weeks off for Christmas, usually it's 1 week. This year we're doing 2 houses, 2 next to one another. So same language, but work and productivity is my biggest problem. They don't understand. And, they have their new Carhartts, the new tool belts and their big Timberline boots, and they're sending texts, it's like, oh, a little work to do here, and it's like, oh, really, they think their mother's going to do it for them, and it's just amazing. It's like, yeah, we got a lot of work. They just don't see that. And so I'm just constantly on them, let's keep going, keep moving, And then, of course, there was a joke, because when I come around, they get real busy, they just jump instantly, I was like, oh my God, I look busy. But anyway, we get through it one way or another, so good questions. Yeah.
I had 2 questions. One was more technical, and the other one's broader, more general overview question. I guess the technical question was, I think your first, lead sustainable house. Basically, it's a big rectangular volume with a kind of simple, pitched roof, but then the wood siding actually comes up and laps like what looks like over the roof.
Yeah.
I'm assuming that that's just the wood is just a rain screen. Is that and then
standing seam under it. So S5 clips. So standing seam on top of the roof, as you can imagine, right? I think 18-inch pans. We set the standing seam, and then we use what's called an S5 clip, which clamps to the standing seam. And then that's what we use to fasten the PVs, but we also use that to fasten what are basically horizontal purlins, and then we can set the wood over the top of that, so you get it flush.
On the wall and on the roof?
On the wall, we don't use the S5 clips, understandably, but we stand that off from the rain screen, which is behind it. We stand it off so you get positive drainage, and then we run the horizontals and then get the vertical siding in that case.
How's the wood weathering on the
Terrible.
roof? That's what I would
Yeah, it looked like old lobster crates. Yeah. We put coatings on it, and I have maintained, my daughter's house had, or they moved, but anyway, had some, we did the same kind of siding there. And I told them, if you just within the first year, you coat it again, and then really every 4 years, you just roll it on very fast, It's hardly like even doing paint. It'll maintain its color. People won't do that, and it's unfortunate. And in that case, it grays out, and it doesn't affect the wood any. It just, I don't care for I like that rich color. I think that's probably why you're asking. And you just have to, there's a little bit of maintenance. It's not like painting a house. And it's all just one big box. It's all fairly even. So you really don't even have to cut anything in. It can be pretty fast. But people generally don't do
The other question was really more kind of overview. If I think about this as a kind of, cultural or intellectual problem or tradition of architects building things, my guess is that in the United States, that's probably going to begin with Taliesin and people like Frank Lloyd Wright, that those are the first people to do that. Then I'm guessing the next generation are people in the 60s like Charles Moore, maybe the things he was doing at Yale, and then they kind of spread. Is that kind of pretty much the lineage of this, or is there a whole other tradition I don't understand?
I understand your question. I'm trying to think back. I don't think I was astute enough to really see what was happening. I just wanted to be a pretty good teacher. And when I found that they had a weakness for that, and that my colleagues, because I had been doing building all the time with Rockhill Associates before that, when I found that my colleagues weren't opposed to it, I think that was my gateway in. prior to that, I was just kind of uptight. I'm not that proud of doing the building. It's the architecture that I like. I just happen to be able to. I don't care for all the stuff that comes with it, the pickup truck and all that nonsense. I just like the design work and happen to be able to do it. So I was always sort of hiding that a little bit. And so, but when I saw my colleagues were so receptive to the students going out and doing what I described at first, I said, oh, I guess it's okay then, you know. I can do that. I never really looked at any lineage. It's a good question, but I don't think I had ever really looked at it with a sense of trying to pick up where they left off or something like that. I was just looking to keep my students busy and happy so I can go off and do my other things too. Pretty selfish motive, but in the end, it just kind of mushroomed into, you know, what it is now. So, good question. Anybody else?
Yes. You ever have any cross-pollination with somebody like Mockney, who was doing something kind of similar to what you did?
Yeah, I know all those people pretty well. Not necessarily. I always, people ask me about those kinds of things, and I always feel like I'm so aloof. Wound pretty tight. You know, I got long days with students. They'll take as much. They're in anything that they won't get themselves into that, you know, I worry about. You know, it sounds, you know, very paternal, but I know what'll happen, and I just need to stay after them, and I kind of keep a business going. So I'm wound pretty tight in order to then. I've been down to New Bern probably 4 times, but any other kind of cross-pollination, that's not my style. My style is to just move through this stuff and know exactly what I'm doing when I hit the ground and work like hell for 9 months and be done with it and got another project, you know.
Do it again. Huh?
Yeah, do it again. And that's just the way I like to keep it going. And it's sort of what works for me. So maybe not for everybody else, but good question. Anybody else? Okay, well, thanks for coming out. Appreciate it.